Okay. Among the more difficult challenges that are faced by both the legal and the psychiatric community is that of determining what is really in the best interests of the child who is caught in the middle of a custody dispute between parents who are separating or divorcing. The challenge has been made much more difficult recently, not only by increasing rates of family breakdown and divorce, but also by growing evidence of parental alienation and the controversy that surrounds it. It is our contention that parental alienation should be considered a disorder and included in the forthcoming DSM-5, and that it should be considered a form of child abuse with appropriate action taken against the offending parent. Parental alienation we define in accord with the other literature as something that occurs as a result of one parent's actions which cause the children to strongly ally themselves with that parent while rejecting a relationship with and denigrating the other parent in the absence of any legitimate justification. The indicators of parental alienation in the child are the following. The child has negative feelings about the parent, negative beliefs about the parent, but those beliefs are completely unrelated to the child's actual experience with the parent. And then the behavioral manifestation of that is seen in the child's refusal or at best resistance to have any visits or any parenting time with the alienated parent. And we stress that we would not want to use the term parental alienation if contact refusal is due to child maltreatment or some other problem with that parent, for example, spousal violence. In those cases and similar situations, the child has a good reason to be resistant to or refusing to see the target parent. Parental alienation occurs most frequently in the context of a highly conflictful divorce. It seems to occur particularly when the parents have been unable to agree on custody and access arrangements, and so you have court determinations of custody and access. It develops when the parent with primary custody vilifies the other parent, making the child believe that that parent is dangerous, the parent is untrustworthy, the parent is irresponsible, and the parent does not love that child. The child is taught that the custodial parent is all good and the non-custodial parent is all bad. Typically, the alienating parent continues to back up that and try to reinforce it by interfering with contact and communication. So phone calls are blocked, emails are interfered with, visits are cancelled, the target parent is told that the child doesn't want to come and visit, is too ill to visit, too busy to visit, or sometimes the alienating parent will arrange for the child to have appointments and birthday parties and so forth at the times they're supposed to be visiting the other parent. Children may actually be punished if they do go against the alienating parent by saying they're enjoying the other parent, that they want to visit the other parent. And so ultimately the alienating parent makes the child feel responsible for their own happiness and well-being through loyalty. And in so doing, the parent creates a very unhealthy alliance with the child, eliciting what is essentially a pathological level of interdependence. And I think this is summed up very well in the voice of this 15-year-old girl who, in describing what happened in her family, says, "You were either on my mother's side or against her. And if you were on her side, you had to be against my father. You couldn't possibly have a relationship with him if you wanted one with her." I think that sort of really exemplifies the loyalty conflicts for the children. There are a number of effects on children depending on the age of the child and the severity and frequency of the mother's or father's efforts to alienate the child. Anger and fear seem to be the most common. Fear is induced in the child through the false portrayal of the other parent as dangerous and is no longer caring for the child. And the child ends up fearing the possibility of losing the love of both parents because, if mom can stop loving me, then so can dad, especially if I don't do what he wants. And then there's grief and there's loss, which is sort of like the death of a parent, because there's a strong disruption of any bond or attachment that the child had, but there is no opportunity to mourn the loss of a parent, as there would be if it were a death. And there's a lot of confusion, and there's a lot of lowered self-esteem for children. When a child is told, your dad is a terrible person, that message becomes internalized, and the child starts to believe, if my dad is terrible, then perhaps I am also. And if my dad doesn't love me, maybe that's because there's nothing about me that's worth loving. When the child feels unloved by a parent, the child doesn't blame the parent, the child blames the self. And that could lead to a very negative self-image, as well as a fear of abandonment by the remaining parent or the custodial parent. So when you have very severe cases of parental alienation, there's also a lot of evidence of children developing either externalizing or internalizing problems. Externalizing problems most commonly seen in school disciplinary issues, drug and alcohol abuse depending on the age of the child, and early irresponsible sexual activity. In terms of internalizing problems, most typically will be issues with trust and intimacy and commitment, effects that really disrupt adult relationships, and you see these very much in cases where the parental alienation is severe and as children grow. So the early problems continue, and along with those there are profound difficulties with interpersonal relationships. It's very hard for the child who believes she was rejected by a parent to trust that anyone could love her. If my mother never loved me, who could possibly love me? There's lowered self-esteem and depression, which are attributed both to the early feelings of being unloved and to the extended separation from one parent. And as children grow and come to understand what has actually happened, there are compromised adult relationships with both parents. There's guilt from betraying the target parent and anger towards the alienating parent. Again, a midlife woman in therapy looking back says, I was horrible. I joined in with my mom as far as saying he didn't do anything right, and I feel really bad that I did that to him. You would think with all this evidence that it would be fairly simple to get official recognition of parental alienation into the DSM-5, but there continue to be significant efforts to deny its reality. And it's just interesting to point out that the same thing happened to the inclusion of post-traumatic stress disorder in the DSM back in the 1970s. At that time, there was a tremendous reluctance to accept PTSD because people were concerned about the possible financial implications, and they said, there's all these Vietnam War vets are going to be coming back, and they're all going to be faking symptoms so that they can get money, and how are we ever going to handle that, and what are we going to do? The sky is falling. And the same sort of thing is coming now with parental alienation, driven by political concerns, mostly gender-based rather than financially based, which I think is very sad. But we have many women's groups and their attorneys expressing their concern that if there is an official diagnosis of parental alienation, there'll be all these abusive fathers out there using it to gain access to their children. And so they have decided to just dismiss all the evidence and label it junk science. We argue that these concerns have little legitimacy, and that there are many reasons to include parental alienation in the DSM-5. First, it's not a gendered issue, so those arguments are silly. There are many examples in the literature of fathers who alienate their children against non-custodial mothers. The greater attention to mothers is just because of the disproportionate custody given to mothers over fathers. Diagnosis actually would make misuse of parental alienation by abusive parents or unethical lawyers much more difficult, because you would have specific, we hope anyway, clear diagnostic criteria. Third, if we look in the literature, you find the same outcomes, the same indicators, behavioral manifestations, and alienation strategies across time and across place, and they pop up in all kinds of research using all kinds of different methodologies. So one can only assume that the findings are robust and the evidence is valid rather than junk. And importantly, from our perspective, there is a strong human rights imperative for making sure that children don't have to continually suffer the effects of parental alienation. If we look at it in terms of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, we see that children who are exposed to vindictive and controlling custodial parents are children whose fundamental human rights are being violated. Looking at the Convention on the Rights of the Child, which has been around since 1989, although many people don't seem to know that yet, it has also been essentially globally ratified, and it is applicable to all children under the age of 18. And that means all children, regardless of their parents' circumstances or their parents' battles. The key articles in the Convention of relevance to what we're arguing here are the ones on the screen there. So Article 3 of the Convention says the best interests of the child are to be a primary consideration in all actions concerning the child. So that includes custody and access decisions. Article 9 says that children have a right to maintain parent-child relationships with both parents in the absence of abuse. So not just a visit-friendly Disney dad relationship, but an appropriate, meaningful parenting relationship in the absence of abuse. Article 18 says that parents should have the best interests of their child as their primary concern, their basic concern, both parents. Okay? And under Articles 19 and 36, we see that children are to be protected from all forms of abuse. That includes psychological abuse, such as being told one of your parents is an evil person who doesn't love you anymore, when it's not true, okay, if it is. But all forms of abuse, exploitation, and maltreatment. So these rights, I say again, apply to every child, and they should be taken seriously. With the convention having been ratified globally, what that really means is we have to stop treating children as the property of their mother or the property of their father, and start treating them as they are, which is an independent bearer of human rights. So compliance with the convention requires that children are not pawns in their parents' battles. They're not used by one parent to seek revenge on the other, and they're not left to suffer the developmental outcomes of maltreatment for political or any other purpose. So our recommendations, and to reduce the incidence of parental alienation, we believe that there should be compulsory mediation during the divorce process. The aim of this would be to avoid court determination of custody and access outcomes, since they increase the probability of alienating behaviors. We think that the articulation of parenting plans should be mandatory. That's the aim there is to ensure that both parents maintain a meaningful parenting role in the child's life, and as much as possible that should be one that mirrors the pre-separation or pre-divorce relationship. And there should be parent education during the initial stages of divorce to ensure that parents are aware of the harm their continuing hostilities have on children, and to be able to understand that the child's needs are separate from their own. To quote Oprah, which I hate to do, but whatever, you have to teach parents that they need to love their children more than they hate their spouse, because they get confused on that. We think also public education and professional development with an emphasis on children's rights, the strategies used by alienating parents, and the long-term effects of parental alienation is very important. To respond to current incidents of parental alienation, we believe that including it in the DSM-5 would enable effective and prompt treatment for children. We would argue also for inclusion of parental alienation in definitions of psychological maltreatment and child protection law to facilitate holding parents accountable. And we'd like to see treatment for alienating parents. Finally, if absolutely necessary, there should be removal of the child and placement with a parent who is willing to instill love and respect for the other parent. Centuries ago, we believed fathers owed their children. This view changed to one in which we say mothers are the only ones capable of protecting and nurturing children. But with the Convention on the Rights of the Child, those days should be past. It's really long past time to take children's rights seriously and to take their best interests seriously. And all things being equal, that means both parents should play a responsible role in children's lives, regardless of their feelings for each other. To do otherwise is to seriously compromise the mental health and the best interests of children. And I'll end again with the voice of an adult, but looking back on their childhood experience of parental alienation. I spent all those years pretending I hated my mom. I tried so hard to please Dad. I was so scared he'd leave me too. I feel awful. I hate them both, and I hate me. Why did no one see what was happening and help me when I was a kid? We think if it was part of the DSM, we hope there would be fewer people having to look back with those thoughts. Thank you.